The New Garden is a podcast on technological power, promise, and peril. Technology is no longer just a set of tools. It's a force that shapes our desires, our communities, and even our theology. The New Garden explores what it means to live faithfully at a time when humanity can rewrite genomes, simulate consciousness, and manufacture joy with the push of a button. Drawing from Christian tradition and moral imagination, the podcast confronts the tension between what is possible and what might undo us. Each episode is a guided reflection on our age of godlike power, an invitation to discern how we cultivate this new garden without becoming the serpent in it.
Brian, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate you being on the New Garden.
Hey, Brent. Good to be with you.
So we'd love to start with the term polycrisis, which you use in your book, Life After Doom, talking about the convergence of different crises that we're facing in this era. And I'm curious how you orient towards AI and the emerging super technologies, especially as it relates to the polycrisis. Do you view them as accelerating the polycrisis, something that might help save us from the worst of the polycrisis? How do you think about technology in this moment that we're in?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First, I know enough about AI to know that it goes far beyond what I know. And so I talk to very smart people who I trust about it and who know a lot more than me. And one of them said to me, who I trust a great deal, he said he thinks that there will be incredible benefits and incredible problems created by AI. He thinks between now and 2030, we're going to see changes most people can't even imagine, both positive and negative. And I asked him if he thinks the negative will outweigh the positive or vice versa. And he just thinks they'll both be so strong, you can't even make a comparison. So that's one thought. The other thing I'd say, Brent, is to the degree that large language models take the best of our current thinking, help us sort through and condense and find the consensus or the best of our current thinking, that could be a big help. It could save us some time. But if our current thinking is part of the problem, then sifting through what we already think, it isn't going to help us as much as we might wish.
Brian, I want to ask you about the shift from your nonfiction career as a writer, as a thinker, principally writing theology, culture, faith formation, spiritual encouragement, to science fiction. I mean, you just skipped over fiction and went right to science fiction. Could you tell us a little bit about maybe the backstory of what compelled you to move in that way, and
Sure.
And what this new book is all about?
Yeah, well, here's where if I'm going to indulge in nonfiction, telling you the actual truth, here's the actual truth. In November of 2016, right after the first Trump election, I opened a file on my computer for The Last Voyage, for this novel that is turning into a trilogy. And it was just, in some ways, I had no forethought. I had no premeditated plan. If the election had gone differently, I probably would not have started that file. And I wasn't doing it necessarily even to publish it. I was doing it in some ways for self-therapy. Okay. I wanted to do some imagination. And what I saw in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump was the election of an oligarch. People were choosing a billionaire whose wealth probably was grossly exaggerated, but nonetheless he was elected because he was seen as rich. And for people to decide that they wanted to entrust their future to business people struck me as a very, very significant move. And especially because I, for the last 20 years have become increasingly concerned, as Brent said a minute ago, by this polycrisis, this sense that we have a number of different crises, each of which makes the others harder to solve. And at the core of those crises is the way we live with the earth, that we're sucking from the earth more than the earth can replenish, and we're pumping out into the earth more waste and poisons and pollutants than the earth can detoxify. And to choose a business person who denied climate change said to me that our nation was making a choice. And other nations were making similar choices, not all, thankfully, but many. And so that made me say, I need to try to imagine where that will lead. And that really became the impetus for the novel. Sorry for the long answer to the simple question, but that's what happened.
That's perfect. So I've been struck by how I feel like you've always been 20 years ahead of people ruminating on things, and what you've produced has been baked, but it started baking 20 years, and you've just proven the point where you started thinking about this in 2016 and it's released in 2025, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. What mirror are you, besides the climate change and the polycrisis that you've talked about, what other sort of mirrors do you see this trilogy holding up as a reflection of the zeitgeist or our current life culturally?
Well, I'll be interested to see what readers feel about this. But as I wrote the book, especially in the first volume of this trilogy, there are two kind of main characters: a father and daughter. Colfax is the father, and Eve is the daughter. And but as the writing went on, I more and more felt I didn't want an individual to be a main character. I wanted actually a team, a crew of people to be, in a sense, operate as a main character, all working together. Sometimes with conflict, but of course, as individuals, we have internal conflicts too. And Eve and Colfax have this particular drama, which is a drama about religion. Colfax, the father, was sick of religion, toxic religion he saw, and his father had no appeal to him. And so he tried to raise Eve with his distaste toward religion. And as adolescents often do, they rebel. And so when your father is a very, very committed atheist, one way you rebel is by becoming a committed believer. And so this tension between father and daughter I think is a mirror of tensions we're feeling about religion, and what I hope people feel is that I hope they feel that it's not a matter of one character's right and the other's wrong, but that each character has a point and they each see something important.
And I'd love to keep going on the thread of, as you mentioned, with technology and how things are shifting so quickly, there are going to be good things that happen for the church and for believers and for the world, for the economy. There are going to be bad things. They're going to be happening simultaneously. Yeah. And how churches and individuals should navigate that in a world in which some folks might feel like their church is stuck, or that it's less relevant than it used to be, that it's not, attracting people in the attention economy. And if there are specific practices or traditions that you see churches needing to reinvent to stay relevant and to stay current in the attention of economy, do you see anybody doing that well right now? And what does that look like?
Yes. Well, so I'm so glad you bring that up. Let me just make one connection to the novel. Eve, this character, becomes kind of the spiritual go-to person on the crew. And she's asked to design rituals or practices to try to help this crew cope with the change that they're going through, leaving the earth for the last time. They'll never be back, and venturing into the unknown. So one of the things I hope people feel vicariously through the characters is the power and necessity of rituals and practices to give shape and meaning and help us pause and not just plunge ahead without reflection and spiritual depth. In our world, well, someone who's become more and more important in my own thinking in the last 10 years or so is a Catholic priest named Thomas Berry. And Thomas Berry said that a culture reaches its greatest crisis point when the stories that have brought it this far no longer help it move forward. And I think this is one of our problems in Western civilization. It's one of our problems in the human species as a whole, and it's a special problem in the Christian faith. Now, I'm a committed Christian, but I think the version of Christianity that I was given and that, hundreds of millions of people are being given right now tells a story of the universe that doesn't match. It's a story where the universe is 6,000 years old. It's a story where God can't wait to destroy the earth to bring all the souls to heaven. It's a story where the main purpose of the whole thing is to sort human souls out to heaven and hell. And I just think that story is not the only story that people could derive from the Bible or the Gospels, especially. In fact, I think it's a very that story doesn't fit very well with what we actually have in the biblical text and in the best of our tradition. Unfortunately, an awful lot of our Christian culture, our songs, our hymns, our liturgies, and so on, were shaped by that heaven-hell evacuation story. And so I think we're going to need very, very deep and profound rethinking. To some people, that's disturbing. I think of it as a liturgical renaissance that's waiting to happen. And I do think there is good work being done in this area, but I think it's only beginning. We've only had the earliest beginnings of the work that needs to be done. And one of the reasons is because I think the language that people raised in the tradition at this point find comforting will seem foreign it won't fit new people coming in, and vice versa. I think the language that will really speak to new people moving forward will seem unfamiliar, and they'll miss the familiar language. Let me give you an example. The word sin, I think, is a super important word. But what the word has come to mean to most people are religious scruples that overly religious people exaggerate. They swallow camels to strain out gnats. I mean, that's sort of the idea that goes the unspoken, the implications of the word sin, for the nuances of the word sin for many people. How would people understand the word sin now? Well, if we were to talk about harm to ourselves, to others, and to the earth, the doing of harm, that may communicate even more valuable understanding of sin than the word sin itself currently does. There might be parts of that are missing too. Well, in that case, we would need to find ways to supplement those too. We might even talk about harm done to ourselves, others, the earth, and harm to the Creator, harm to the God who cares about this earth, and to have God's creation be harmed brings harm to the Creator. That would be an example of the kind of shifts and rediscovery of language that could help us. One other quick example, if that's okay, Brent. We have talked about the body, mind, and spirit, or body, soul, and spirit. And what this reinforces for many people is what some people call a dualistic ontology, if you want a very fancy word, that the universe is divided into physics and metaphysics, or to matter and spirit. And in today's world, it's a lot more complicated than that. But I think there is new language available for us to talk that actually, in some ways, shows us the beauty of that traditional language. For example, if we were to talk about our nervous system, the way that contemporary scientists talk about our nervous system, that we have this deep evolutionary heritage of the deep brain, what some people call the reptilian or the fish brain, that's oriented toward survival. And then we have the mammalian brain that's oriented toward belonging. And that's where emotions and affection and all the rest comes. And then we have this newest part of the brain, the neocortex, that's oriented toward meaning. Well, very interesting. That matches pretty well with some of the old language we inherited. If we can use that new language, it might invite people in without making them think they have to accept some old view of the world that no longer makes sense to them.
Yeah, and I want to go a little bit further before I ask about the liturgical renaissance, and we call this episode Atomic Revival, and there's going to be a hopeful note. But can you first take us deeper into the crisis?
Yeah.
We've been exploring this possibility over the course of this podcast, but if you accelerate the tools and the market conditions that have led us to this point, and you mentioned that Christianity has gotten us here, but we might be headed in a trajectory that doesn't end in a happy place. What does that start to look like if more of this shifts online and the presence becomes digital and some of our relationships become shifted to algorithms rather than interpersonal, and some of our liturgies aren't as relevant for this modern era? Like, where's the place we don't want to go that you perceive the church as heavily influenced by technology to be heading?
Yes. So here, let's take that word artificial reality and let's make an alternative. And I'm not judging it as good or bad. It's neutral. Artificial intelligence, I mean. And then we were to talk about natural intelligence. Natural intelligence would be intelligence that comes from nature. And if people were to just consider this, what if there is a kind of intelligence that we only get when we interact deeply and regularly with the natural world, with day and night, with winter and summer and the other seasons, with drought and flood, with life and death, with just the intricacy and beauty and interdependence of the natural world. If we create this artificial world that is primarily about economics and politics and entertainment and even superheroes and all the rest, I just went to see the movie Superman, so I have superheroes in mind. We create this whole alternative world.
Limbic hijacks. Someone said it's based on limbic hijacks.
I love it. Limbic hijack says it really well. In a certain sense, what we do is we keep drawing ourselves out of the natural world that may have the wisdom we need to face the realities we need, and we find ourselves in this artificial space. And here's the irony. This is one of my complaints as a committed Christian with conventional Christian theology. In a sense, conventional Christian theology created an artificial world, a world of doctrines, where arguments about doctrines were more important than whether we were taking care of the soil, where arguments about angels were more important than whether we were polluting the water, where speculations about heaven and hell were more important than whether we were turning the earth into a heaven or a hell, where our internal squabbles about this or that religious practice were more important than whether we were going to war and creating weapons of mass destruction, right? You can see that if you create an artificial world that sucks up all of our attention, it can make us sitting ducks for not solving the problems in the natural world outside. I mean, that's a super obvious thing to say, but I guess it's my obvious, my most obvious and maybe emotionally heartfelt response. But I think your question has so many other layers to it as well. But that's a place I'd start.
Brian, how do you locate? I'm just intrigued because there's such a dichotomy, and we can say all we want, like there's going to be good and there's going to be things that aren't so good with emerging technologies. But what you've just articulated is something that is completely countercultural to the trajectory of technology, of
Yeah.
where we're headed, the future. And so I'm wondering, we have this, like, I mean, over time, the church uses technology, whether it's architecture or hymn books or
Yeah.
all of these things. Like, and you did, as a pastor, you were part of that.
Yes.
I'm a part of
Yes,
that
yes, yes.
still. Before the screen with the words projected, there were hymn books.
Yes.
So how do you nuance that? Like, in this, there's sort of this pietistic way that we could consider engaging life and life together as purely organic, purely natural. And yet technology, we can't help ourselves but to create these technologies. And it doesn't have to be, technologies aren't just digital, right? I mean, they evolve over time.
Yes.
So, like, how does that fit? How does some of those technologies fit and encourage human flourishing or better living or better stewardship of the earth?
Yeah. Well, first, I think, Tony, that the way you asked that question, I think is really helpful, because you're saying this is complicated. It's not new. Like, let's just use the example of a hymn book. Now, look, I think there are many things that matter, not just our environmental sickness right now, but I do think our environmental sickness is a matter of existential threat. So let me stick with that for a minute. I grew up with the hymnal as a major part of my life. And one of my favorite hymns was Fairest Lord Jesus. And the reason I love that song is because I love the meadows and the woodlands robed in their blooming garb of spring. And I love that hymn celebrated it. But it was just a couple of years ago when I was thinking about how much I love that hymn, and I looked at how the first verse ends. Fairest Lord, fairer the meadows, fairer still the woodlands, robed in the blooming garb of spring. Next line, Jesus shines fairer, Jesus shines purer. I forgot that the next line that rhymes. It ends with the word
shines
sing.
brighter. Yeah.
Who makes the woeful heart to sing, I think is it. But then I thought, there it is. We'll celebrate the woodlands and meadows only to say that Jesus is better. And I, in that hymn that is so precious to me, I see an undermining of the value of the natural world. Like, we only will say it's pretty to say that Jesus is better. Well, look, there are other ways we could have done that, but our hymnals taught us what to celebrate. And so that's a technology that and we did it in a building with stained glass windows that kept us from seeing the outside. So part of what I would say is our technology could reconnect us with the natural world in a way that would be much more helpful. For example, what if we have hymns that are accompanied by really quality video of the natural world? And what if, instead of singing about how great the natural world is only to say Jesus is better, we were to learn from the language of St. Francis, who in his famous poem, song called Laudato Si, he said, "Be praised, my Lord, through brother sun. Be praised, my Lord, through sister moon. Be praised, my Lord, through the wind and all the different kinds of weather." It wasn't like those are just a cheap imitation, you're the real thing. It was, no, we praise those things, see their value, and in so doing, we praise you. This, by the way, it's so interesting to see how what St. Francis did is like what, if folks have ever read the Haudenosaunee protocol for Thanksgiving, where each part of it starts by saying, we thank the fish, we thank the trees, we thank the waters. And then we thank the Great Spirit, who's the source of all of these things. But the two aren't in competition. So we could use our technology to make us more aware of this real world, or to be an escape from it.
And how, when you say those words, we could use our technologies to make us more aware of the real world, do you feel like that is something that is realistically on the horizon, or do you feel like that's a pipe dream that's not going to happen? Like, where does it localize for you? And what would have to be true for the LLMs and the tools that are increasingly going to be the tools that we're using to access our work world, our interpersonal world, likely our faith world, to bring about that liturgical renaissance and reconnect us with nature? Like, do you see that as a bridge that's possible?
I see it as a bridge that's possible, but here's where the algorithms probably, we need something. Well, it just depends on who programs the algorithms, I suppose. There are human hands and human minds that steer some of these things, and make choices about where we land and what we emphasize. Look, here's an interesting. Here's where my mind goes with your question. It's such an interesting question, Brent. I think, for example, okay, what's going on in Gaza right now just is agonizing, and it's heartbreaking. And what's especially heartbreaking is that millions of people don't know about it because the only news channels they focus on make sure they don't have to think about it. And then on top of that, some news channels that deal with it, things are shaped by political assumptions that allow them to not take seriously the magnitude of what's happening. But then you think it doesn't have to be that way. People could really be shown, because of technology, what it looked like when that bomb fell in a plaza of children waiting to get fed. And people could feel that. But then that creates a problem. If we use technology to help people feel the brutality of what's being done in Gaza, then people say, well, what are we going to do about it? Well, then if we start asking the question, what are we going to do about it? We're going to have to face other issues. And when we face those other issues, they're going to force us to face issues of wealth and power and so on. And then our churches are going to have to ask, do we really want to go there? Do we really want to address those issues? And that's where very human decisions will come in. And if we only let the shiny and new and exciting technologies direct us without ever having human beings ask those kinds of questions that require courage to me, that's the fork in the road that we face.
Brian, can I follow up on that? How do you, how does nuance play a key role into this future that we want to receive? You talked about this at the beginning, and to play devil's advocate, somebody could just say, well, the news channels you're watching are just providing a particular narrative, and that can end in deep despair and hopelessness when everything is curated to affirm what we already believe. That's all I worry about. Yeah, not worry about. I tell people as they're thinking about joining a church, don't look for a church that you agree with everything stepping in on that first day. Join a church that's going to challenge you in some different ways, who thinks differently, because they need you and you need them. So how would you respond, especially to someone who is in this sort of vortex of despair? Maybe it's apathy more than anything, because everything is so curated, so subjective, so wanting to produce outcomes before the person even engages the content or material. So how do you How do you navigate that nuance?
Yeah. Well, it seems to me our first choice is, do we accept that things are curated? Anything that involves language involves someone who spoke the language, and anyone who spoke the language chose words with nuance.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't just true of technology. This has been true of writing and speaking. So we have to come to terms with the realities of bias and human interests that make objectivity a very lofty ideal that's very hard to achieve. What that's going to require is that first we can either pay attention to that and take it seriously, or deny it. If we deny it, then what we do is we just make our choice and let some group of people influence us, and we don't need to ask any questions about them. It's because in some ways it doesn't matter. Whoever we choose is biased. And in a sense, we've surrendered ourselves to the flow of some set of algorithms in computers and some set of values in human beings, whether it's greed or prejudice or hate or revenge or whatever, some ideologies and so on. If we say that we care, then ironically, we have to teach people critical thinking. And this is one of our challenges in religion, because in some ways we've seen faith and critical thinking as enemies. And I'm coming to see that faith in the kind of faith we need makes critical thinking a necessity. And so we will, in a certain sense, well, we see it in the Bible. How many times does Jesus say, let the person who has ears to hear, hear? And how many times does Jesus also say, take heed how you hear, for many will come in my name, right? So Jesus is asking people to have critical thinking, to hear beneath the surface, to see beneath the surface, to take heed, to be careful of how we listen. So we would have to take seriously our role in teaching critical thinking. Yeah. The Bible is a really good book for that, by the way. It has layer upon layer of critical thinking. And so that would be a good thing for us.
Brett and I often talk about, like, what are the college majors as we have kids who are coming up in the world? Like, what are the college majors that we want to encourage our kids, or even the classes in school today that they have options to take? What are they that will help them navigate this world? And we often talk about critical thinking. We often talk about philosophy. We also talk about, like, classic liberal education that teaches us these fundamental skills. So there's a lot of resonance with what we're talking about, especially when you're talking about AI and built on large language models. What you said at the very beginning of your answer is so relevant because somebody is making cultural choices about how that model is being built, and then how it learns off of that model. I think that's just as relevant, whether it's pre-AI or post-AI. It's human. It's being human.
It's a human problem, exactly right. Yeah. And so much of it just has to do, we talk about large language models, but even language in my own brain is a very complicated thing. And there's an awful lot going on there. And I inherited a language that shapes the way I think. And the people who speak it with me shape the way I use the language. So it's complicated. And here's one of the interesting things. To build in people. Yeah, I'm just thinking of the book of Proverbs. When I was a kid, I memorized so many verses from the book of Proverbs. I'm glad I did. But these verses that say, seek understanding like you would seek for gold. Seek for knowledge and wisdom as you would seek for silver. Well, I mean, there's a statement. Something that's more important than money is your thirst and hunger for reality, for understanding, for knowledge, for truth.
And I think our tools that we're using will be the gateway for a lot of that seeking.
Yes.
And I think for this upcoming generation, it will be navigating through LLMs and thought partners that are virtual. And so how would you caution or coach someone listening to this to discern if a technology can stir the spirit and stir ritual? How do you discern what's coming from the spirit versus just well-coded software? And can grace come through an LLM if it makes you cry real tears through a shared prayer with an LLM? And like, what would that look like? How would you instruct someone?
Yeah. I think the critical thinking, well, first of all, Brent, can I just say, I'm so glad you're asking these questions, because there are not many people asking the questions you two are asking. So please keep it up. And they're so important. And I'm thinking about them too. So I join you in holding the importance of these questions. I think one of the things they're going to force us to do is to think about our own brains. We're going to have to realize how our brains are networked brains. They're networked through the internet. They're networked through spoken word. They're networked through video screens where we see facial expressions on one another. And then they're networked through the actual physical interactions that we have. And for example, I think a major part of our brain is devoted to us being herd creatures. We're mammals who, first of all, mammals are highly social because the mother gives birth to the baby and feeds the baby from her own body. That connection between a mother and child is necessary for not only the survival of the child, but for the survival of the species. So that sense of affection and connection is part of our being mammals. Add to it that we travel in herds, that we're part of groups or tribes or whatever. So I walk into a room and without me being aware of it, faster than I can think, my brain is saying, I wonder how I fit in here. I wonder if these people like me. I wonder if I like them. I wonder if I'll be seen as important or unimportant in this group. These are questions. I know this because I love animals and I love horses. And when you're with horses, you realize horses are way more tuned into each other than they are to you, because they have their own social structure. And you start to realize the pecking orders in horses and so on. You start to say, oh, all that's going on in me. And so this is going to require us to, if we want to not just be tossed around by all those currents that are going on, we're going to have to become more aware of how our brains think. You might be aware, a simple little tool that I put together is a little ebook on bias to try to help people understand common biases and how they're like glitches in the software of our brains that keep us from seeing reality very often. Anyhow, that's part of critical thinking, and it's a critical thinking that really focuses on the functioning of our own brains.
Can we go one step further there to something you mentioned with Eve from the character from
Yes.
the science fiction book, developing new rituals
Yes.
in a modern tech era? What rituals do you perceive that are happening now that serve us particularly well in this era? Or what rituals should churches and families and individuals be looking to cultivate in their own lives to get to a healthy and spiritually vital place?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me just say from our traditional liturgies, the act of speaking words together or being in a public shared conversation, the Lord be with you and also with you. This sense of rhythm and speaking with one voice, to me, this is more powerful than most people realize. And we need this sense of connection with other people. And what I sense is if we don't get it in one way, we'll get it in another. For example, if we don't get it in a faith community, we'll get it in a political rally. Or if we don't get it in a faith community or political rally, we'll get it in a sports event. We have a craving to be with people who are moving their bodies together and who are aligning their energies together. It's so deeply involved, and it will either be for positive and healthy and constructive purposes, or less so. Same with singing. What an amazing thing. Singing forces us to synchronize our breathing. And if the singing has notes, to actually create unity and harmony and diversity. And if it has words, to unite around the words. I mean, what incredible treasures these are. This most basic elements of a traditional liturgy, or the act of sitting in silence together, especially if we get enough guidance to know how to use that silence. For example, if I got together with a group of people for 30 minutes a week, for 5 minutes a week, we said we're going to be quiet, and in those 5 minutes of not talking, not speaking, not listening, we're going to try to remember that there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot that we think we know that might be wrong. And we're going to try to just keep an awareness of how much we don't know and how much our words do not access, right? Just that simple discipline would help us bond to that reality in a deeper way. So many of those elements are there. Unfortunately, so many of them get distorted. I'll just give you a quick thought on this. My definition of a ritual is something we do with our bodies that helps us bond to meaning. And ritualism is when we keep doing the ritual, but we've forgotten the meaning. And then there's a kind of harmful ritual that when we keep doing the ritual and we're bonding to a harmful or false meaning. But the power of ritual is still great. And anything that we think is worth bonding to, we have to find ways, I think, to keep reinforcing that.
Brian, let me get technical on this and give you a scenario, and would love to hear your thoughts on it. So what you just described about getting together with somebody for 5 minutes to observe where God is, or be present in our bodies, etc. What if, and this is already happening, Brent and I, we're fully convinced that everything we think of, somebody already thought of 5 years ago and is doing it. But we're we should do proof of concept on this. Well, somebody's already done it. But an app, right? That functions in the same way that other functions. We have this idea, what if there was an app that, at the middle of the day, it sends you a notification and says, stop, breathe for 1 minute, put your feet on the ground and open your eyes and see where God is in nature, wherever you are, and the other person across the room. Do you see that as a valid expression of what of engaging the meaning? Or is something lost when there's a lack of human connection? Because those prompts that you just talked about can be delivered through technology.
They really can. Yes. So I think, Tony, the term, the well-known term for what you're describing is a disruptive technology. A disruptive technology comes along and delivers some good or service in a way that disrupts the traditional ways it's been delivered. And let me give 2 examples of this. And I remember being shocked both times when I experienced them. First, this goes back 20 years. I was at a big festival in England called the Greenbelt Festival. And this is a place where a lot of people who were struggling with their faith would gather. And I remember sitting with this couple, and they said to me, we used to go to church 52 times a year, 1 hour each. Now we come to Greenbelt once a year for 52 hours. And what they were basically saying is that going somewhere intense where you camp out on the land and you have this intense experience for 52 years, for 52 hours, it was roughly 4 days, they felt they were experiencing something that was having a greater impact than what was happening at the church. Now, I'm not saying that should be true, but I'm saying that was their report. And then more recently, I work with the Center for Action and Contemplation. And in about 2015, they started sending out a daily meditation. And the number of people who stopped going to church, but then discovered this daily meditation 6 days a week for 10 minutes. They read and consider and pray using that daily thing that comes in their daily meditation, comes in their inbox on their computer. And I can't tell you how many people have told me, yeah, I dropped out going to church, but this seems to be meeting the need. Now, some people should say it shouldn't meet the need. It's wrong. It is.
It is.
And I think my proclivity in this is to say, let's watch what's happening and let's have creative people like you two. And I hope I can be part of this in my own way too. How can we make contributions here that will be contributions for good and be disrupting some either unhelpful, harmful, or just ineffective current technologies with some that are generative and creative and healing.
So in a very baseline level, you're not a Luddite here. You're open, but we need to have discernment and a critical approach to these technologies. Are they doing what we want them to really do? Or are they, like the way Brent and I often talk about it, is, are they creating vice or are they creating virtue?
That's a beautiful way to say it. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I have so many moments in this process and this exploration where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not God. God's got a bigger plan. And if God's doing something new with these technologies and God wants us to be reconciled and in a more unitive experience with God and in nature and otherwise, how do we help shepherd this? What's our role to helping technology use the new tools that are emerging to build spiritual communities that are guiding people towards awe and presence and reconciliation with nature and transformation? What's our role in this?
Yeah. I mean, just the way you just said it, Brent, if you put reconciliation with one another and reconciliation with nature on the agenda, I'm not sure how many algorithms would put that on the agenda. Depends on who set them up. What might naturally happen is, how can we gain greater control over those people with whom we disagree, or how can we overcome them or minimize them or marginalize them? How can we get nature more under our control? And so just the way you phrase the question, it seems to me then sends us into the fray, seeing how we can use these technologies in ways that will be useful. Let me just give another example that comes from traditional liturgy. I notice in the Lord's Prayer, some years ago, I noticed this, and it's just hasn't gone away from me. In the Lord's Prayer, we say, forgive us our trespasses, our debts, or our harms or wrongs, as we forgive those who trespass against us. One of the things I notice about that language is that it gives 50% of the attention to the wrongs we've done and 50% of the attention to the wrongs that others have done to us. It's striking to me because in almost all religious settings, I am led to focus on the wrongs I've done to others and never pay attention to the wrongs others have done to me. And I wonder if that doesn't set me up to be in denial about the wrongs that others have done to me. And in a sense, I think the original prayer actually invites us to pause on both, to feel the gravity of how others have wronged me and the ways that I've wronged others, and to feel both of them. And by feeling both of them and wanting forgiveness for both of them, something happens to me that's different than just wanting forgiveness for myself, right? So that to me is part of the artistry and the moral intelligence of figuring out how we design the interventions that we're trying to design in people's lives to help them. What do we want them to pay attention to? How do we balance these different things out?
I'll keep going and ask, what I'm hearing is churches have the opportunity and the imperative to set the agenda and then to connect humans to move on that agenda together. So, if technology is going to be a powerful tool that allows us to accomplish our objective, what's the objective? What's the agenda that we're trying to accomplish? And then don't forget the rituals that bring us together to accomplish it. That's how I would piece this together. And I'm curious, if you were to take that and to make it a so what suggestion, if you're planning a church in and for the digital age, what would it look like? And what would you do differently than maybe some of the historical or common ways we do church now?
Yeah, well, I would start with those really, really basic questions like, what is this thing all about? One of the discussions we're going to have is, what do we mean when we say the word God? Because when those of us who've actually spent a lot of time with the Bible realize that the Bible contains different understandings of God. And in fact, that understandings of God in the Bible are contested. They're often arguing with each other. If you want an easy example of that, the book of Job gives a great example. And in many ways, I see Christians having to come to terms with the fact that Jesus takes sides in the arguments about what God is really like. And I don't think we Christians have let Jesus really, I don't think we take him very seriously as someone who took sides in those arguments. But we would have to, and then we say, well, if we're going to make some commitments in what we want to say about God, what we mean when we say the word God, I think that will be reflected in the language we use. And not only the language, but the kind of language. And one of the things that a lot of theologians have been paying attention to in recent years, the term for it is theopoetics. That poetic language is often the language preferred in the scriptures to refer to God. So much of the Bible is poetry or is other works of art. If you think of a parable is a short work of fiction. And so I think we would have some very, very, we wouldn't skip over those very basic concepts or issues. What do we mean when we say the word God, and what is at stake in that process? And then that would lead us to a question, well, what is important about Jesus? Why is Jesus important? What was Jesus' core message? How would we articulate that message today? Not just what did Jesus mean in his time, but if we're acting the part of Jesus, if we're embodying Jesus in our time, what does that mean? How would that be addressed to our time? So those would be, I wouldn't jump to the technical questions without having the necessary work done in those sort of most basic elemental questions. And whatever I did in those areas, I wouldn't assume it would be the final word. In other words, we would learn as we go, and we'd have to keep going back, which is one of the great advantages of these new technologies, is they help us continually improve. The fact that you can only upgrade a hymnal through an awful lot of effort over an awful lot of time, or you can only update a creed through centuries of argument, our ability to speed that process up with technology could actually help us and help us keep improving, not being whimsical or cavalier, but like scientists, this is our very, very best understanding right now. And if we come up with a better one, we promise we'll update it. That would be the spirit in which I would undergo that work.
Understood. Thank you. Tony, you have anything else you'd like to get in before we wrap?
No. Well, I'm just very grateful. Yeah, feeling very grateful for your insight, Brian, over many years, and now your ability to emerge and evolve with the time is really encouraging, and I hope Brett and I can do that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and Brian, is there a prayer or a hope you would want to leave listeners with who have navigated this season?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the two of you for the questions you're asking. These are important questions, and I would love to stay in touch with you about these questions sincerely, because I think it's important to ask them, and in the spirit that you're asking them. And the second thing I would say is this is a time for us all to become grown-ups and say, what do I actually think is really, really important? I don't want to just be tossed here and there by every new thing. What do I think is really important? And in the process of clarifying that for ourselves, I think we'll become better people. If we're Christians, we'll become better Christians. And we need that now more than ever.
Got it. Thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing your time and heart with us.
Yeah, thank you, Brian.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
The New Garden is a production of First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta. Produced by Tim Haney. Executive producer, Mark Wallace McGuire. Music by Sindhu Geed.
Seeing eyes swallowed by their pride. Night is taken, day is taken. Where's your God? Says your God. Only picture perfect latitudes thrown around the room. Look around, we're the only ones left, holding fast when everyone's gone. Can't you see